Okay, it's a wonderful crowd and it's very, very colorful out here. Yeah. Thank you, Carol. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. I'm very honored. I'm honored to introduce our afternoon speaker, Dr. Mark Clegg. A little closer, okay? This seems really close, okay. Dr. Mark Clegg is Associate Dean for Collaborations and Partnerships and Professor of Music and Director of the Gershwin Initiative in the School of Music. He researches all forms of music making in the United States. His research questions focus on how music forges and shapes social relationships and the art of sound as simultaneously a transcendent emotional expression and an everyday tool for living. Professor Clegg holds affiliate appointments in American culture, African and Afro-American studies, nonprofit management, and entrepreneurship. Before joining Michigan's faculty, Professor Clegg served as executive editor for Music of the United States in America, a series of scholarly editions of American music published by AR Editions for the American Musicological Society. He also held editorial positions for the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago, where he helped complete the International Dictionary of Black Composers under the direction of Dr. Samuel Floyd. Before joining the Michigan faculty, Professor Clegg was principal bassoonist with the Chicago Civic and Rockford Symphonies and played periodically with the Grant Park and Chicago Symphony Orchestra. His undergraduate degrees are from the University of Michigan, and his graduate degrees are from the University of Chicago. In addition to today's program, approximately and maybe more than 44 UMRA members will be joining Professor Clegg at Sunday's concert, Who Could Ask for Anything More, which will feature Gershwin music. And then there are some other events which Dr. Clegg will also inform us about. So please help me welcome Dr. Clegg to UMRA.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here. I'm surprised about how big the audience is. This is amazing. I didn't know I was going to have a crowd, and a crowd online as well. I'm a long-time Ann Arborite. I was actually born in the old St. Joe Hospital, which is now the nursing school. So my grandfather had a grocery store on Packard, which is now the Argus Farm Stop, if you've been over there. And so my dad was a neurologist in town, a member of the medical school faculty. I was going to follow in his footsteps and came and did my undergrad and pre-med in chemistry, and then I just started doing more and more music and art, and somehow I ended up as have the incredible honor of really being able to come back to the university as a faculty member, even though my mom lives about 2 miles from where we're standing right now, and my sister's over in Canton. So it's really amazing actually to be in my hometown at one of the great universities of the world. And unfortunately, my children did not want to stay in town. They are all other places, Chicago, New York, and Indianapolis. But I did get to go to the championship game last Saturday and take my daughter. So that was pretty awesome. And I still have the same, Section 16, row 72, seat 7, which my father bought that season ticket in 1970. So we have been going and sitting in that same seat for 50 some years. So it's really a thrill, but I definitely bleed maize and blue, and so it's a huge honor for me. I actually just added yet another administrative role to my portfolio, which is interim executive director of the Arts Initiative for the university. So doing a lot of that. I meet with President Ono tomorrow at 3 o'clock, so wish me luck. But advocating for the arts really across the entire University of Michigan ecosystem. So it's really an incredible privilege to be at this place where just so much can happen. I mean, Michigan is such a place of possibility, as all you know firsthand. And really, I think the arts are an exciting place to be because we have this incredible quality of these, top-notch schools. Taubman Stamps, SMTD, UMS, which is just brings in world-class. The Berlin Phil is practically a hometown orchestra here. which is just mind-boggling to me and my students. And then to have the art museum and the incredible things that are happening there. So it's really a privilege to be in my hometown and also with the greatest university on the planet. So one of the really exciting things we have is the Gershwin Initiative, and I'll tell you more and more about that as we go. But I thought I would give you the origin story. It's sort of part of the magic of Michigan as our alumni network, and hopefully Roger's got me set up with this machine here. Now it's doing something. Okay, here we go. So that gentleman there is Todd Gershwin. Todd tells me all the time he actually works on Broadway, and people get his business card and they're like, wow, your name is the same as the composer. and so he is the great nephew of George and Ira Gershwin, and he's a graduate of the University of Michigan. So he graduated from the kinesiology program in sports management, went on to a career at St. John's. He was actually athletic director at St. John's briefly. But then he joined the family business and became a Broadway producer. He's produced the Janis Joplin musical. He's currently representing the Peanuts Christmas. So he tours all around the world. He comes back. We have, the best musical theater program in the nation is at the University of Michigan. So that's another thing I would highly recommend is any musical theater show, you're going to see future Broadway stars, if not current Broadway stars. Like our students take time off from their studies because they have to be on Broadway for a year or two. It's the most selective program on campus. We have 1,600 students apply for 24 spots. So it's way harder to get into our musical theater program than it is to get into the law school. It's like a 2% acceptance rate. And they're just amazing talents. They do a senior showcase in May, which is also just incredible. So Todd comes back and works with our students as well. But he basically made a cold call to the university in 2008 when Christopher Kendall was dean. It was actually a cold email, but I don't know if we have that phrase, so I call it a cold call. And he basically said, hey, my name's Todd Gershwin, just wondering if you'd be interested in working on my uncle's work. And we were like, okay, yep. And it took about 10 seconds for me to say yes to that opportunity. And it was really because Michigan is a center for the study of music in the United States. I mean, I had the privilege, I've been doing this for like 30 years now. It's hard to believe since I'm so young, but Richard Crawford maybe is a name that some of you know, was my mentor, longtime professor emeritus, still living in town here. But Michigan took seriously the art of our country at a time when most musicology and universities were really only cared about Bach and Beethoven and Brahms and Haydn. And so our interest in American music really goes back to like the 1920s and 30s. The earliest, like Britten Recital Hall, which is where a recital will be on Saturday night, which I'll invite you to, is named after Alan P. Britten, who was dean of the School of Music, and he was a hymnologist. So he studied American hymns for churches. And so long history of studying our culture. And for my students, I think it's sort of magical because I'm asking them to think about music in their own lives. I mean, that notion of music as a tool for living, which I actually stole from Rich Crawford, my mentor, is really about looking at the way music helps us figure out who we are. My other big area of research is on the U.S. Star Spangled Banner, on the national anthem, a book called Oh Say Can You Hear, which you should all give to your children and grandchildren for Christmas. But it was really a labor of love for me to talk to my students about what does music mean to us as Americans, and if there was any song that's American, it's either Love Is Here to Stay, Fascinating Rhythm, or the Star Spangled Banner. I mean, those are sort of the songs that help us figure out who we are as people, I think. So Todd called us and said, would you like to work on our uncle's work? Now, interestingly, if you know anything about Ira and George, I mean, George was the most eligible bachelor in the United States at the time, never had any kids, and neither did Ira. So where does Todd come in? Well, Todd comes in from the unknown Gershwin siblings, who are pictured here. So this is the quartet of Gershwin siblings. So, and the other two that you don't know, George is in the middle, he's the tall one, and they all have very heavily receding hairlines. So you basically can date the photographs of George by where his hair is. So this is relatively late. This picture is clearly taken in the 30s. Ira's on the far left, and the woman is their sister Frances, or who went by Frankie. And Frankie was actually the first to become famous. She actually appeared in a review with Cole Porter in Paris in 1928, and then the unknown Gershwin brother is Arthur. So Arthur Gershwin was also a composer. A very bad idea to be a composer if your brother is named George Gershwin. He did write one musical, which nobody remembers, but Arthur actually had a son, Mark Gershwin, and Mark is Todd's father. So Mark has three sons. He currently lives in Los Angeles, which is an important part of the story, which I'll tell you in a bit. But for his whole youth, they actually lived in George's apartment on Riverside Drive in New York. So long legacy. But it's the sister and the third brother who had children. Frances actually had three kids, twin girls, and then another daughter. She's also sort of famous. She ended up marrying Leopold Godowsky III. Leopold Godowsky II was a chemist who invented the Kodachrome process for Kodak film. So there actually is a whole story around photography that's in the Gershwin family too. Leopold Godowsky III is a famous concert pianist. So very, very musical family. But Arthur is the one to which we owe the connection to the University of Michigan. And of course, this connection is not random. I mean, one of the sort of weird things is like, why would the Gershwin family look to the University of Michigan for to host the sort of legacy of George and Ira? I mean, one reason is certainly the luck of the fact that Todd came here as a student, but the relationship to New York is actually a historical artifact of anti-Semitism and the limits on Jewish enrollment at a lot of colleges around the United States. So Columbia University in New York had a limit of how many Jewish people could be enrolled, and they had a special college where those students were placed. The University of Michigan welcomed everybody, and so part of our historical connection to New York is a historical connection to the Jewish community in New York, and that's in part why Todd saw the University of Michigan as a connection. So, and one of the fun things is that Todd's nephew Noah, so the great nephew of George and Ira, graduated from also kinesiology and sports management a couple years ago, and now Todd's daughter Audrey is applying to the University of Michigan. So I'm getting lots of calls from the Gershwin family wondering if I can put in a good word for the daughter. I'm like, that's not how we do things here. I really don't have any influence, but I'll do what I can, which is nothing. But I want them to think I'm very supportive, and I am very supportive. But I can tell you, Audrey is super excited about coming to Michigan. She wants to be here more than anything. So I hope that we have another Gershwin on the U of M alumni roster. So that's very exciting. But George Gershwin was born in 1898, died tragically young in 1937 of a brain tumor. So he was only 38 years old. I sort of compare him to Mozart in that regard. I mean, Mozart also died very young, but left us a beautiful body of work. I actually did an interview this morning with a magazine in London called The New European, and they were asking me, well, what would American culture be like if George Gershwin had lived? And I was like, well, one thing we would have is George's first symphony, because there are these letters in the Library of Congress where he's talking about his plans for his first symphony, and it's just like a dagger to my heart every time I read that letter that we don't have that. But on the other hand, I'm super grateful that we have Porgy and Bess, that we have Of Thee I Sing, that we have Girl Crazy and OK, and this incredible Broadway legacy, that we have Rhapsody in Blue and An American in Paris, and his musical imagination and his sort of, he was a workaholic. He was not an early riser. He would get up at like 10, 11 a.m. and have lunch. He would exercise, avid sportsman and tennis player. He was also a painter. This is one of his self-portraits actually on the screen there. And I find it sort of interesting because it's sort of got a red, white, and blue American theme going. And it's also, as you can see, it's got sort of abstract shapes in the back. So one of the things we forget about Gershwin is that he was a modernist. He was very interested in telling the story of his time and place, of being attuned to the most sort of advanced developments in musical modernism in Europe. But he also was, one of the great melodists of music history, able to write in these enduring tunes that were incredibly accessible at the same time they were sophisticated. So really an interesting figure in the history of music, and another one of those figures that was sort of ignored because he was too successful. He was commercially popular, and so academics thought, well, that couldn't be worth anything because, it's not real art unless everybody struggles to understand it. But Gershwin, I think, had a mindset that he just wanted to write great music, and great music to him meant really sophisticated music with great harmonies and very learned. He was it's a mistake to think of him as a self-taught musician or a savant. I mean, he was a genius for sure, but he actually studied music seriously throughout his life. He studied Chopin, studied Rachmaninoff. He was taking composition lessons all the way up through the year he died, and he was constantly eager to know more about music. So certainly a very educated person, even though he dropped out of college at age 15, which is not, or dropped out of high school. It's not part of the story I tell my students, like that you should all be like George Gershwin and drop out now. No, we don't talk about that. We talk about his passion for learning. But because he died so young, he didn't have the chance to curate his legacy, and that's really sort of where things come in for the University of Michigan. An amazing talented pianist. Born in Brooklyn, but really lived in Manhattan, and I think this is important because he was part of a cultural melting pot from the whole world. Like, Manhattan, New York was initially a Dutch colony. It was a mercantile economy. And it really is about international trade, and it was about shipping and bringing new ideas and new goods there. And, New York today still has that legacy of being sort of the most cosmopolitan place. It's not Ann Arbor, it turns out. I mean, it might be, although we're close, because everybody comes here from New York because of the University Musical Society and the museum. But I think he absorbed that sound work of the Yiddish theater and the churches and black music and classical music and the popular music industry and songwriting and Tin Pan Alley. Like, all of that is just part of his sound world. And I don't think he thought of them as separate boxes, like little silos to be mixed like spices in a dish. It was really all part of one thing for George Gershwin. And that's, I think, part of why his music is so magical, is because all of those things mix together in a way that doesn't sound constructed or like a gimmick or a game. It's just George Gershwin. And for that reason, for me, he's really the sort of the key to American creativity in many ways. I think I have a little bit of a recording here, Roger, if you want to click that. I don't know if you can see that little icon. It's in the very middle of the screen. This is George doing a piece called Rialto Ripples, and this is a recording of him playing piano, and his piano stylings are important. But you can hear a lot of ragtime in this. And that's really, George's sound world is really stride piano. It's less swing jazz, which is how we think of him now, because his music was reinterpreted by musicians after he died in the 1940s, and Tommy Dorsey was playing his stuff, and it became part of the swing era. But his world is really ragtime. It's really much more of a kind of march, straight up tempo with syncopation, which is that sort of jazzy, offbeat accents. Let's see. Whoops, am I going backwards, I think? Okay. The other person we can't forget when we talk about George is his brother, Ira. They were very much a team. They started really writing together in 1924 for a show called Primrose, which we are currently editing. And, also wrote this piece, Fascinating Rhythm, which I'll talk about in a second. In 1932, the Gershwins were awarded the Pulitzer Prize, but only to Ira, not to George, because there was no Pulitzer Prize for music in 1932, only a Pulitzer Prize for literature. So the Gershwin Pulitzer was actually given to the three authors of The I Sing, which is, in the Gershwin family is iconic in the same way that Porgy and Bess is iconic. I mean, that's the sort of the famous show. The Gershwin Prize in Songwriting, which is awarded annually by the Library of Congress, has the lyrics of The I Sing in the medal. And we get, because we're working with them, we get invited to that prize every year, which is sort of fun. We get to hang out with some pretty cool people like Willie Nelson but it's sort of an amazing story. And Of the I Sing is the other big Broadway show we're working on right now, in part for the in anticipation of the 250th birthday of the country, we're trying to edit the shows, which I'd sort of been scared to take on until now because they're big and iconic and complicated. We started out really with the concert music. I did the edition of An American in Paris, which we'll talk about. But I wanted to talk a little bit about their songwriting, and that's what we'll hear on Sunday. So Michael Feinstein and Yaniv Thibodeau, two really famous pianists, are going to be doing a concert at Hill I think it's at Hill Auditorium, is it? Yeah, okay, 4 o'clock on Sunday. They're going to do duo piano. So it's a big weekend of piano, because it's also going to be duo piano the night before at the School of Music, 7:30 at the recital hall. That's a free concert, and as long as you get there early, I think you'll get a really good seat. But George wasn't really seen as a piano master, and he brought a kind of life and excitement to the piano and to accompanying song that really nobody had heard before. But he was writing music for the biggest stars of the day. This particular song, Fascinating Rhythm, which I'm sure you know, is from the second musical that George and Ira did together, Lady Be Good, also premiered in the London's West End. And Fred and Estelle Astaire were brother and sister. They were a dance team. Adele was way more famous at this time. Everybody thought that she was going to be the famous one. And Fred, ended up eclipsing her in popularity in the movies. But they wrote the song Fascinating Rhythm for the Astaires. So what I have for you is really interesting, is basically a rehearsal recording with George playing the piano and Fred and Adele singing Fascinating Rhythm. So, and I'm going to just switch to this so we can see a little bit of the lyric for the chorus. You'll hear the verse initially, and then they'll get into the chorus. So, Roger, we'll listen to this until basically we get through those words. But I want you to just think about the energy of this song. What is it about this song that makes it so special? Yep. It's painful to have to cut this off, but I think in the interest of time, let's turn it off. But you can hear George's really distinctive piano stylings, and one of the problems is if you get the sheet music to any of his songs, it's really not what George had in mind, right? The commercial sheet music is sort of a simplified version that's just the basic chords. When George played the music himself, he added that big piano solo at the end. One of the fun stories that Mike Strunsky, who is the head of the Ira estate, lives in San Francisco, tells me all the time is about Ira later in life. And Ira would constantly be asked, when you were working with George, which came first, the words or the music? And Ira would look pensively and then sort of say, the contract. But typically they wrote side by side. And sort of wrote music and words at the same time. This particular tune, we do know that the music was written first, so it's really a George improvisation. And what Ira would do in the instances where lyrics didn't immediately come to mind, he would sort of meditate on the words, and so he would make up sort of dummy lyrics to try to help him remember the melody, and then he would update the lyrics as his imagination kicked in. So this particular one, he had this melody, dee da 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 da, and he was like, what am I going to come up with for this? I mean, this is the weirdest thing ever. It's not this big soaring, someone to watch over me kind of melody. So the dummy lyric he made is fascinating rhythm, to try to remember this fascinating, confusing rhythm. And the dummy lyric actually became the permanent lyric for this particular tune. But what's interesting about this and what I represent is we think of George and Ira Gershwin now as like classics, like iconic, right? I mean, they're the center of the Great American Songbook. This is what American music is. For George and Ira, this is an experiment. This is constant. This is new, modern music. They are trying to push the envelope of what song is, to take the songs of Irving Berlin and Cole Porter and just carry that forward into a new tradition. So, and I think this is a problem with a lot of, we think of Mozart in the same way. We think of him as sort of conservative, as defining the middle of the tradition, when actually they were sort of radical in their time. And certainly too of George. So one of the things that's interesting about this, if you look at it, sort of as a poem, you see the repetition of the title phrase, you see a rhyme scheme, but one of the things about Ira is that he always had a lot of unusual multi-syllabic, sometimes multi-word rhymes. So we have a quiver and a flivver instead of just the sort of traditional end rhymes, or a hopping and stopping. So that's sort of very characteristic of the modernism and the sort of new thinking that Ira was bringing. The other thing, if you had a high school English teacher like I did, one of the things you had to do is scansion of all the poems, right? You'd do the rhyme scheme and the number of syllables and your iambic pentameter for Shakespeare's sonnets and all that. Well, you cannot do iambic pentameter with Ira Gershwin because he would mix up the lengths of the lines. So you've got sort of basic sixes here, but then you got a few fives thrown in for fun, a 9 and an 8 and a 3. And it's that asymmetry that I think is reflective of this modernism, which is sort of invisible because we're so comfortable with this music. It's so like iconic to us. We don't hear this as sort of a modern experiment. But the thing about both George and Ira, I mean, the way that George is listening to the world around him, he's listening to the Yiddish theater, he's listening to African American music and bringing that into his music. Ira's doing the same thing as an observer of popular culture and slang, like flivver. Anybody have a flivver when you were growing up? Another word for flivver would be jalopy, right? It's a car. It's like an old broken down car. You guys are way too young to remember those days, I can tell. That's good. I was speaking a couple days ago to a group of the Birmingham Men's Club. I was talking about the Star Spangled Banner, and apparently a lot of them had been there in 1812 when the Star Spangled Banner was written. So I don't know. It was an interesting group of guys. But Gershwin's fame, I mean, here he's on the cover of Time magazine in 1925, and it's partially based on the success of Rhapsody in Blue, but really based on his success on Broadway as a Broadway composer, which is what he was most known for during his lifetime. He had aspirations to, well, at least people around him had aspirations that he would be able to elevate American music into the pantheon of Bach and Beethoven and Brahms. I don't really think this was so much George's thinking. I think he was just trying to write great music. And for him, great music meant that it was sophisticated and emotionally powerful, rhythmically vibrant, sort of in conversation with the most advanced musical aesthetics of the time, but it also was music that people could love, music that they could understand and engage with. But one of the things that made him quite famous was working with soprano Eva Gautier, who's a Canadian soprano. And they did a recital together in 1923, which was called a recital of ancient and modern music. And George came on and did the accompaniment, and just everybody went crazy. One person in the audience was Paul Whiteman, and he will play an important role in the history of Rhapsody in Blue, which is, for me, the most iconic melody. When I was a high school student growing up here, and I played in the Michigan Youth Symphony, I played bassoon and saxophone. So we took Rhapsody in Blue on tour with Louis Nagel. I don't know if you know that name, a pianist on faculty, does a lot of concerts in the community. And he was the soloist, but I played both saxophone and bassoon on that concert. It was fun. But Whiteman wanted to show that jazz was a real art music, that it was just as good as any other kind of music. And so he did a concert, which he called an experiment in modern music, and he invited, like all the most famous soloists and music critics to attend this concert to hear and pass judgment about whether jazz was art. And he asked George Gershwin to write, who had already had famous songs. Swanee was his really his biggest hit of his career from 1919-20, and he asked him to write a jazz piano concerto to merge jazz with the classical tradition, and the result was Rhapsody in Blue. Rhapsody in Blue is remarkable for lots of reasons. I mean, he effectively wrote the piece in about 10 days because he was opening Sweet Little Devil, one of his shows in Boston at the time. So he was going back and forth on the train. So some of the train motives, the train sounds that are in Rhapsody in Blue might reflect his time on the train, right, thinking about the piece. But he had very little time, and so one of the things he did is he wrote out the sketches, and then the house arranger for the Whiteman Band. The Whiteman Band was it was really a jazz orchestra. So it had French horns and violins, as well as, I think I have a picture of it. Well, I don't have a picture of it right there. But only, it was a weird band. For instance, the guy who played string bass also played tuba in the band. So you couldn't have the tuba and the string bass playing at the same time because he could only hold one while he was playing. So you had to know this about the band. It wasn't that you just abstractly put together the orchestration. That Russ Gorman, who was the principal wind player, played 19 different instruments. So the oboe part, the sopranino saxophone part, clarinet part, were all written for one guy. And again, you can only play one instrument at a time. So you really had to know the people, not just the instruments. And so George turned over the orchestration duties to Fer de Graffet. And in some ways he probably regretted that decision, because for a long time, and people who were jealous of Gershwin's success, I think, thought, well, he couldn't really orchestrate. He needed help to do his work. So, that was a reputation that George had to live down really for the rest of his life. In part, I think, because he was so successful, that classical composers who didn't have the kind of success he did in their own genre, I think, resented that. But I really see George and Ira as kind of prophets of American culture, as people who lead the way in imagination, because they didn't see, American ideas as put in little silos or little boxes. It wasn't about white music or black music or the concert hall and the jazz club or Yiddish music and Christian music. It was just all sort of part of the same thing. And something like, you couldn't have Porgy and Bess if you couldn't have all of those ideas mixed together at the same time. And I don't think it was so much that they were trying to do anything political. I think they were just trying to do something magical, do something artistic that spoke to people and that resonated with their time and place. And these were the sounds, these were the ideas that characterized the Manhattan that they grew up in, which had people, was this melting pot, right? The Statue of Liberty calling people from all over the world, to their hometown. And that's the musical milieu in which their whole vision of what art could be was shaped. And so, for our students, I think this is an incredible opportunity. And the reason, basically, Michigan's involved in this critical edition. A critical edition is a long-standing scholarly practice where, we bring the best of research, of looking at recordings, of looking at, handwritten manuscripts, letters, commentary from the composers, and try to create basically a book that has music notation in it that tells you exactly what George and Ira were trying to do. And one of the challenges that faces George's legacy is that, on one hand, it was so commercially successful that those in the family, don't fix what ain't broke. If it's working, we're not going to have a bunch of editors come in. It was also, I think, one of the magic of Gershwin's melodies, they're so iconic. They also they're chameleon-like. They move through our culture in all sorts of different ways. So, if you get on an airplane from United Airlines, you're likely to hear the love theme from Rhapsody in Blue, because it was their theme song for so many years, and it got used, and there was every ensemble in the world would play an arrangement of that piece. So, on one hand, Gershwin's music was so powerful, so elastic, that it could succeed in all of these different genres and arrangements. On the other hand, the original version that George wrote sort of gets lost in the shuffle. Like you can't, nobody even remembers what that is. So one of the things we're doing is we've actually published our very first critical edition. They've been available and recorded for ensembles for a long time, but now you can actually buy our score of the original version of Rhapsody in Blue for the jazz band orchestration with the Whiteman Band. And so that's actually being published by the Gershwins through Schott International in Germany. So it's very much an international project. We work with scholars all around the world who are interested in George and Ira Gershwin. We're interested, I think, for our students, that the learning, they're involved in every step of the process. So the University Symphony Orchestra, our jazz band, our jazz students are, played the solo, that we test these and test drive all these editions to find the mistakes that we make. Because it turns out that musical scores have like literally hundreds of thousands of little dots and dashes and lines and things on them. And it's almost impossible to get it all right. And the big frustration for me is in computer engraving these days, you accidentally select something on the page, you lean on the keyboard and you move it like up and down the scale. So there are things that we get right that we have to go back and fix. So it's a very big responsibility, I think, to be publishing this legacy, and a huge honor for us to be working on, to have the trust of the family. They really see not only an alignment with the history of Michigan, but with the sort of depth and breadth of excellence in our school. The fact that we have a jazz program and an opera program and a musical theater program, that we have to train conductors, that we train composers, that all of this stuff comes together to really involve every aspect of our school. So the Michigan Marching Band does a Gershwin show every couple years, and as well as the Symphony Orchestra, which tested a lot of our performances. Because George died so young, he didn't have the chance to curate his legacy himself. He couldn't take responsibility for publishing the final authoritative versions of all this. And in fact, many well-meaning editors after he died, went in and sort of corrected it, because they didn't think of George being a learned musician. He didn't have a degree in music. He didn't do things the way other composers did things. So on one hand, that could be a problem. For instance, he wrote saxophone parts for the symphony orchestra. Like, symphony orchestras don't have saxophone players, right? So if you're going to play the piece, you need to hire saxophone players. And for George's mind, it was like those three saxophone players in the Whiteman Band were his vision of what a saxophone player was. So those three guys had like 9 different saxophones, and they could pick up a soprano or a tenor or an alto or a bari. Didn't matter. You paid them the same amount of money. With a modern orchestra, they each get a doubling fee every time you add an instrument. So his original parts for American in Paris have 3 guys playing 8 different saxophones, which is fabulous if you hear it in its original version. But editors in the 1940s were like, George was sort of silly. He didn't understand how the orchestra works. We'll make these saxophone parts optional. We'll simplify it so they all play one instrument the whole time. We'll just have an alto, tenor, and bari. They won't be switching around. Well, it's a joyful noise when you have 3 soprano saxophones wailing away on the Charleston theme in American in Paris. And we restored that original vision to the piece. So it's been recorded and performed by the Detroit Symphony and others. So it's an amazing honor for me, and I think I will stop there and take a couple questions, because I told them I could go for about 15 hours, and they told me that was too long. But yeah, let's open up the floor for any thoughts or questions. Yeah, no. I love it when I'm such a good teacher that no one has any questions. Oh. I think we're going back there, and then we have one up here.
I can talk loud enough to
Okay,
hear me.
I'll repeat it for the audience at home.
What were their parents like? The fact that they had 4 incredibly intelligent, artistic children. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us anything about the parents?
A little bit. So the parents are Morris and Rose. They both were immigrants who were coming from Russia and the Ukraine to escape, anti-Jewish violence in the late 19th century. If you've seen I'm forgetting the musical with Tradition. What's that one called? Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, Fiddler on the Roof. So that's basically the story of their childhood. Morris was something of a serial entrepreneur, so he always had a business going. It was like a tailor shop or a grocery store, and they never very successful. Each one lasted about a year, and so I think in George's and Ira's childhood, and Arthur and Francis, they moved 29 times in 28 years or something. They were always going had some other he had some other venture going on. Rose was really I think the linchpin of the family, kept on together, and it was her idea to get a piano so that Ira, who is sort of the bookish, introverted type, could learn how to do something that would make him more socially sort of adept. And the story is told that the piano came, was delivered to the house, and Ira was taking lessons, and one day George just walked up and started playing. And they were like, oh, genius. And so George sort of took over. What George actually did is he was fascinated with a player piano in a drugstore down the street. And so he would get the player piano to play, and then he would follow the keys. So he learned how to play piano from a player piano, and that's why everybody thinks he was just born knowing the piano. He actually practiced, but he was practicing outside the home, and then he started taking lessons from that point on. So he did do, he had a piano teacher and studied Chopin, all the things that. How many people studied piano as a kid? I mean, that's basically what George did. He was just way better at it than you and me. And one of the good stories I tell about George is that part of his fascination with music, he was taking music theory lessons, and when he did his homework, he would actually solve all the music theory settings, like harmonizations. He would do it like multiple times. So he would turn in his music theory homework, like 3 times over, and that is something that our students today do not typically do.
I was wondering, do you have a personal favorite or a few favorite pieces that you particularly, well, you love it all, but that you enjoy?
Absolutely. I mean, I haven't met any Gershwin I don't like. And I have to say, when I first got the opportunity to take on this role, I was super excited, but also a little scared. I mean, this is such an important legacy and responsibility. But for me, the most exciting piece that I have edited myself is An American in Paris, the orchestral tone poem. And part of that is as a bassoonist. It's not a big bassoon piece, really, but there's the second half, which is where he goes into the homesick reverie in the jazz section. Actually, there's this very subtle gesture in the bassoon, which for me was always a very big artistic moment, even though when you're a bassoon player, basically nobody hears you on the orchestra. So you're largely doing it for yourself. But when I took over the role as editor-in-chief of this project, I wanted to sort of get my fingers into the soil a little bit. And so I took on the role of editing that. And part of the excitement was, I love the piece, and I know the orchestra. I played it many times as a musician. And so I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward and simple. And in many ways, I thought the whole project was going to be relatively straightforward. I mean, what is there to discover about Gershwin? Like, we all know Gershwin. It's not that people don't know An American in Paris. But it turns out that when you look at things with a fresh set of eyes, I mean, basically, as a critical editor, as a scholar, your standpoint is don't assume anything. Everything needs to be questioned. Everything needs to be tested. And so one of the things I was doing in my office in Burton Tower at that time was listening to a 1929 recording that George Gershwin had made, supervised. He actually played the celesta part in An American in Paris. And I was listening, and I heard that they are kind of taxi horns that go honk, 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 honk. And they're basically like a representation of the taxis swirling around the Place du Concorde in Paris. And I just wonder what pitches those are. And I went over to the piano and poked them out on the piano to see what pitches they were. And then I realized that they didn't match what everyone was playing. So it turns out there is no standard notation for taxi horns in classical music. Beethoven never wrote for taxi horns, which is probably why George was interested in it. But George, when he was in Paris in the summer of 1928, actually went to all the auto shops on the Avenue de la Grande Armée, and he bought every single horn that he could buy. And they're those old-style brass curly-Q horns with the rubber bulbs. And then he took them back to his hotel room, and there is an account of some pianists, duo pianists who were visiting, who said, yeah, he had these 20 horns, and he was experimenting with them to pick exactly which ones he wanted. And he actually had us try it out. George played the piano, played the orchestral work, and the pianists were honking the horns. And he brought those four of those horns back to America, and he put them on a board, and labeled them A, B, C, and D. And then he had a notation that looks like a snare drum line, so it's just the rhythm, and it says play A here, play B here, play C here. So it's perfectly clear when George Gershwin is president and hands you the four horns. So after he dies in 1937, the four horns are lost. Arturo Toscanini is recording An American Paris with the New York Philharmonic. They're the group that premiered it. They're using the original parts. They get to A, B, C, and D, and what does a musician do? Looks at the piano keyboard and plays the notes A, B, C, and D, which makes a lot of sense. However, taxis are rarely organized enough to travel around in A minor scales as they move through the Place de Concorde. And it turns out that the actual pitches that George picked were A flat, B flat, high D, and low A. So a much wider range, a super high note and a really funny, humorous low note, like honk, honk, honk. And when you do the original pitches, it's way more sort of dissonant. It gives a sense of excitement, of humor, of danger. That makes a lot more sense for Cars in 1928. So Cars in 1928 hadn't been around that long. They were sort of exciting and new and also a little scary. I mean, so Ava Gautier actually, shortly before American in Paris was written, it actually was a pedestrian walking around Paris and got hit by a taxi cab and was hospitalized. So there was an element of danger to Cars too. I mean, not unlike today, but even though they were moving a lot slower than they do today, it was still conceptually very fast. And so that element of fear and danger and excitement is in the piece if you use those original pitches. Not so successful if they make a rising scale. It doesn't seem like so random or cacophonous. So that was one of the discoveries that we had that was covered in the New York Times. Like, who knew that people had been playing these pitches wrong for 70 years? But they're very much, Gershwin thought of them as musical notes. So that particular discovery makes American Paris my favorite.
Same question, but change Mark Clegg to George Gershwin. Were there songs or types or things that and you can rehire it if you want, that were favorites or they liked over others in all the work they did?
I mean, certainly Porgy and Bess is the great masterpiece of both George and Ira, and George basically did that as a volunteer. I mean, he made a lot of money off of Swanee, off of Rhapsody in Blue, and he basically self-funded Porgy and Bess as a passion project. No one commissioned him to write that work. He wanted to write it himself. He had a radio show in New York that sort of paid the bills while he wrote Porgy and Bess. So I would say, that was certainly the work in the family that that George loved and that the family loved. I would have loved to hear the second opera that George would have written had he lived longer. And I can say that the family, travels all the way around the world today to hear new productions of Porgy and Bess. And in some ways it inspired the Critical Edition and the U of M project, because they were touring around and a conductor named Andrew Litton, who was a family friend, talked to them backstage after the performance and said, why do you let this, these terrible parts be performed all around the world? And they were like, what are you talking about? So it had been the same pieces of paper from the 1936 production that were continuing to be used all the way up through the 2000s. Our edition is now the only edition available worldwide. So if you hear Porgy and Bess, it's the University of Michigan edition. And one of the things that was strange about the previous parts is that George was, on a press timeline, he wrote the piano vocal score, which had all the singing parts, and then had a piano reduction of what he imagined for the orchestra. That went into production as a publication while he was doing the orchestration, taking the piano part and expanding it to the orchestra. While he was doing that, he kept changing his mind about things. So he would add measures here, take measures away. So until our edition came out in 2018, the piano vocal score that the singers and the chorus used did not have the same number of measures as the orchestral score that the conductor and the musicians was using. So when you get into rehearsal, it's a little confusing to say bar 252 for the orchestra and bar 253 for the chorus. And so, that's opera people are not unused to such things because there's cuts and all sorts of things. But now I'm happy to say that everything lines up and matches.
Yay.
Maybe I'm mistaken, but I seem to recall that there was some issue some years back about whether there were stereotyping in Porgy and Bess, and there's some sensitivity about that. These white guys writing this stuff, and maybe it was a little too stereotypical of the African Americans.
That is certainly an important issue. it's basically we call it cultural appropriation, when people who are in a sort of a culturally more powerful position take the cultural products of people who are in a socially weaker position and profit off of that, or become the storytellers for people who are disadvantaged. Certainly true throughout American history that Black Americans have not had the cultural power and authority. That people like Duke Ellington did not make as much money as the white publishers, who were putting out the records and the sheet music. I think with George, it's sort of complicated. I mean, with everything, it's complicated. I do sincerely believe personally that George, had colleagues and was part of the musical scene in New York among Black pianists in particular. So people like James P. Johnson. If you know the jazz tradition, you know that rhythm changes, which are the particular chords that follow the tune I Got Rhythm, is a jazz standard. And one of our current graduate students, Tracy Lombre, in American culture actually, has done some really interesting work around this, showing that James P. Johnson himself was part of the way in which that particular tune got inserted into the sort of jam session traditions within jazz practice. And for James P. Johnson, it was a way of honoring his friend George, who was part of, a colleague. And so I do think, I said earlier that I didn't think that George and I were being political when they mixed things together. I do think that George was being political, or at least celebratory, when he took a Black story that featured by necessity Black musicians and Black artists, and used his popularity and his success to put them on stage. So, John Bubbles, who was the initial Sporting Life, was a famous sort of performer, but was not a mainstream performer. And George gave him, a platform to show the world what he could do as an artist. And so I do think, and Rich Crawford is my mentor, the emeritus professor at Michigan, was sort of the first to share this opinion with me, that he really thinks that George loved Black American music and wanted to see it respected. And part of the reason for writing Porgy and Bess was to have a vehicle where Black music could be celebrated. And if you know the burial scene, the spirituals that are in Porgy and Bess, there's a way in which the Black actor singers who perform that, and by contract they have to be, African American or Black singers, that they make that music their own and bring an authenticity to George that amplifies George's voice and makes it their own. So I do think there is a magic around that. I can tell you my current students, they struggle, for instance, with the dialect that's in Porgy and Bess. And I think that's particularly hard for modern audiences. For DuBose Hayward, who wrote the novel that with his wife Dorothy became the play, which then became the opera libretto, DuBose Hayward's mother was a scholar of Geechee language, Gullah and Geechee language, which is the Black dialect that's within the enslaved community in the Georgia Sea Islands. And so it's not an exact use of that language. It's sort of a little bit of a translation of it that would work for English-speaking, mainstream white audiences. But it is, I think intended as a part of authenticity. And George went to Folly Island. He went to Charleston. He's, made music with the musicians there as a research project, as part of writing Porgy and Bess. So I think there's a sincere attempt not just to use, but to celebrate and to understand that music, which is evident in the success of the musical score. So for me, it's complicated, but I do think that, in George's mind, and especially if you think about 1935 and 36, George was super famous, but there's a lot of anti-Semitism in the world in that time. So I think there's a kind of empathy maybe between George and Ira, and understanding another group of people in America that often is stereotyped, that was, had disadvantages, and finding a way to use culture to celebrate that diversity. And of course, that legacy is much of what the university is embracing today. One of the other exciting projects we have going at the university is a commission by a Nigerian-American composer, Nkiru Okoye, that will premiere on February 10th at Hill Auditorium under UMS auspices. It's called When the Cage Bird Sings. It's a celebration of sort of the emancipatory power of Black women. And there's also an enormous number of Black operas, operas by African American composers and librettists that I think in some ways is building on the tradition and trajectory that the Porgy and Bess, doors that were opened at the Metropolitan, for instance, if Fire Shut Up My May Bones, was recently done. And I think Champion is being done by Lyric Opera in Chicago, and hopefully, fingers crossed, Detroit Opera will be doing Rhiannon Giddens' Omar at some point in the near future, which just won the Pulitzer Prize. So I think there are now, fortunately, black artists who are getting opportunities to tell their own stories on the opera stage. But James P. Johnson wrote 2 operas in the 1930s, again, George's friend. His operas were not given the prominence that George's fame allowed Porgy and Bess to have. So I think there's a way in which that opera really opened doors, and I see it as an activist work that has a lot of positive legacy. And part of it is really to understand the history of the show. So if you engage with it as stereotypes, you could see it as perpetuating those, and there's certainly that legacy there. But there's a way, I think, the depth of understanding we're trying to bring to our students at Michigan and through this project, I think, hopefully highlights some of the really positive powers. But it's a mixed bag at best. Yep.
Hello?
Nope. Oh, okay.
I'm just wondering, is there a way to purchase any of your renditions or the project?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of stuff online. I mean, we try to give away for free as much of it as we can. So there are quite a few concerts and lectures that we have curated that are available on YouTube. The cast recording of the Metropolitan Opera premiere of our edition with Angel Blue is available for purchase. This new score is available from Schott Music International, both as a full jazz score of Rhapsody in Blue, but also as a 2-piano score, sort of a study score. They're not inexpensive, probably like over $100, and but they are out there, and they are in our library because I put it there. But I think increasingly there will be things are available for public sale.
I'm sorry, where would I search to find all that stuff?
You can, so the Gershwin website at the university would have links, or you can go to Schott Music. If you just search sort of George and Ira Gershwin Critical Edition, Rhapsody in Blue, it should pop up on the website in Schott. If not, just email me, I'll send it to you. We have a question up front here. Oh, and more question. Okay. And I'll be around. I don't have to teach. My students are doing their final projects at 2, so I got a few minutes.
You've taken some of the questions and expanded them tremendously. Is there a diary that you've created that has that background answering other people that might want to? In other words, you've taken 15 years of study and just given it out to us like, oh, here it is. But is it written down somewhere? That's really my question.
There is a lot of publishing on Gershwin. One book I'd recommend is Howard Pollack, who's a U of M graduate, teaches at the University of Houston, wrote like literally the Bible of Gershwin studies. It's called George Gershwin, A Life, or maybe, I think, or Life and Music. It's like 860 some pages, so it's my go-to source for anything Gershwin. It's got a beautiful index. First half of it tells George's story, and the second half of it is really focused on individual compositions. So you can sort of dive in. You do not have to read the whole thing in one day. I am also happy to say that a lot of our work is being published. I mean, not only my research, but also the students working for the Gershwin Critical Edition. So we have a range of undergrads to PhD students who work as assistants on the project, and many of them have gone on to become Gershwin scholars in their own right. And there is a recent publication called The Cambridge Companion to George Gershwin, and edited by a friend of mine, but it probably has 6 or 7 articles that are directly derived from the U of M project, including one by me about George's business practices and the way he brought sort of Broadway thinking to classical music, specifically around An American Paris. So we definitely see the whole project as having a service to the Gershwin legacy, a service to our students, but also a service to the world to get these ideas out. We're constantly hosting, symposia, things. And so I want to invite you to a couple things. If you I think there might still be tickets available for Sunday, so you should go to that if you'd like. The ums.org would be available. Michael Feinstein, who's one of the pianists, was Ira Gershwin's assistant. So he was a little kid growing up in Los Angeles, basically met with Ira Gershwin and sort of became his sidekick for a while. So he knows more Gershwin stories than anybody. I've talked to him on the phone. I've actually never met him, so I'm excited to meet him this weekend. And then the night before, one of my colleagues, Logan Skelton, who is one of our piano faculty members, probably one of our most successful piano teachers, has also been a real fan of the Gershwin project and himself has taken on Gershwin as a research project. So he's arranged a bunch of Gershwin songs for piano, four hands, and for two pianos. And so he will be playing with some of his colleagues for free, 7:30 at the recital hall at the School of Music, Theater and Dance. Is free parking on the weekends. It's almost worth driving to the School of Music just to get the free parking. You don't even have to go to the concert. You could just park there. Everybody in this room knows that story. The other thing, which we haven't even announced yet, so you are the first audience I've told, is that on the 100th anniversary to the day of Rhapsody in Blue will be February 12th, 2024. So it was premiered on Lincoln's birthday, February 12th, 1924, at Aeolian Hall in New York. So we had it all set up to give a concert on Monday night at the School of Music in the same recital hall. And then Russ Collins, who a bunch of you may know, was like, why would you give the concert for the centennial of Rhapsody in Blue in a room that only holds 250 people when you could come to the Michigan Theater where we have 1,700 seats? And I was like, well, one reason is I would have to carry George Gershwin's piano from the School of Music to the Michigan Theater. And he was like, we can figure that out. So we have one of the really special things is that when Mark George Gershwin, so the father of Todd, moved out of the family apartment in Riverside Drive to Los Angeles to be closer to his grandkids, he had this piano in his apartment that had been there since George died. It's George Gershwin's piano. It's like, what are we going to do with this? And so I said, I have an idea. You could donate that to the University of Michigan. And so he had it appraised, and it was worth somewhere between $20 and $2 billion. And no one really knew. It was completely unplayable. It hadn't been tuned or taken care of. So we eventually shipped it back to Ann Arbor, convinced them to donate it to us. So it's part of the legacy of the Gershwins at the University of Michigan. And so it's available in our recital hall as a student instrument to play. Like if musical theaters want to do students want to do a recording of the Great American Songbook, they can actually be accompanied by their pianist on George's piano. So it's a miraculous piano. It's quite small, but it's if you're George Gershwin and you call up Steinway, they do not send you their worst piano. They send you the best one they have. So it's a pretty amazing instrument. The other little factoid. So anyway, we will be taking that instrument the day before February 11th, because that's Sunday night at 6 p.m. We will have a free concert at the Michigan Theater. There are 1,700 seats available. It will look very empty if you don't come. So please bring all your friends and all your relatives and show up. The other little thing I'll tell you, sort of in closing, because I know you probably have something to do today, but I do have a definitive answer of exactly how much that piano is worth, because the appraisals couldn't figure it out. But we were in this intense negotiation with Todd and his dad over donating the piano, and he was trying to decide if he was going to try to sell it, and we were like, no, and eventually decided not to sell it. But basically Todd was like, I'll give it to you for 4 tickets to the Final Four. So it was the year that we were in the finals, and so we traded 4 tickets to the Final Four for George Gershwin's piano. So that is exactly how much it's worth. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Craig, this was a great way to launch the holiday season for us, but thank you. And I really do hope people take advantage of the concerts. This was really interesting. Thank you very much. Okay, wait.
right, we have a few more announcements to make before you all start moving around and getting food and whatnot. So again, thank you to Professor Clegg. I would like to move on to just a short program, but before I do that, I have to ask Pat to come forward. Okay. You knew we weren't going to forget this entirely.
I knew that.
And we did almost blow the secret. It came pretty close. But Pat is stepping down from the board.
Kevin, move the microphone.
Oh, Pat is stepping down from the board after 24 plus years I'm going to start crying.
Oh, then I will.
She has been an inspirational leader to the retiree organization between volunteer roles, energy, I don't even know how many million hours of hard work, recruiting her husband to UMRA to help as well. So a constant volunteer and somebody who we're very proud of. Al and I were talking about tickets to the Rose Bowl, but we came up with a better idea. So the board is presenting this to Pat. So you have to open it.
Beautiful wrapping. Beautiful wrapping. I hate to ruin this paper.
It's okay, just go ahead, rip it open. And then we'll read it.
Okay.
Okay, so we are presenting to Pat the
Microphone.
Patricia M. Butler Distinguished Volunteer Award. So this will be, the board of UMRA will in fact make this award, we think annually, to volunteers who are stepping up, not board members, but volunteers who are stepping up as part of our membership. So 24 years of exceptional service to UMRA membership as well as to retirees in general. The award will exemplify Pat's standards, values, energy, selflessly volunteering to help UMRA and all of its members. So Pat, thank you. Oh, wait, one more. Don't go anywhere. Okay. So this is sort of the envelope. The envelope, please. Pat, you get to open this one because it's the first person to receive the award.
Oh, wonderful. Rip and tear. Like
Rip and tear, you're too neat.
That's like you do at Christmas, right? Okay, there we go. Am I supposed to read this?
Yes.
Dr. Patricia M. Butler Volunteer Leadership Award, presented to Carol Williams this 7th for her volunteer leadership, service, and dedication to the UMRA Travel Program since its inception in 2015. University of Michigan Retirees Association says, thank you, Carol. Yes, you did almost blow it, didn't you?
Something maybe I would get that.
Yeah, well, you got it now.
Oh my God, thank you so much. Let's get some photos. What an honor. Thank you all. Let's get some photos.
This is Carol's.
That's Carol's. Oh, wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. You've got the banner behind you. Oh,
Yes.
that's great. The tears out of my eyes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there.
Okay.
I do have to say, it has been a wonderful 24 years. It really has. And all those 24 years, my husband, come up here, Don.
Yeah.
Here. my husband has been beside me the whole time, supportive. Although he has been saying lately, you know, you really need to stop this. So anyway, and thank you all. It has been a pleasure to be doing this, and I will still be around. Okay?
We are counting on it.
So let's get the three of you real quick.
Thanks for the whole board.
And
come up.
the three of you, and then, yeah, Carol. Okay, move over from, yep. Okay, are we all right? Are they smiling? Are they smiling?
Yes.
Carol, great. Turn your picture around, Carol.
Yep.
All right. Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We are, before we start, I wanted this to be on part of our Michigan Media Filming for our online audience, because they also have benefited a huge amount from Pat's leadership. So to our online audience, thank you for joining us. Happy holidays.
Not yet.
Oh,
Our anniversary.
oh,
Yeah, we're staying
Sorry.
with streaming. Stay streaming, and we're doing our anniversary.
oh, okay. So don't turn off your computers for those online. Al, you're coming up to give a brief summary of the history of Umrah.
That's a pretty hard act to follow, though. But I did think, since we're celebrating our 70th anniversary, is the microphone, it's on. Okay, just a little closer. Since we're celebrating our 70th anniversary this year, and at this holiday gathering, our anniversary gathering, I thought we should maybe just look real briefly at some of the interesting parts of our history over the years. I did write up a longer article that's in the December Umrah News, so if you have some time on your hands, read the longer article, but just a snapshot of some of the things that have happened. We pretty much have said that this organization was started in 1953. It was started as the Michigan Annuitants Association, and it was for faculty only. In the early years, they had 100 or 200 members. The dues at that time were $1. And it was voluntary, and you had to pay in cash. I don't think Roger wants us to pay in cash any longer, so we've moved on from that, and we've gradually increased our dues to $15. Really, not very much over a 70-year time period. We were very fortunate that Professor Everett Soup actually donated $10,000, which helped pay for some of our activities over the years. We set up an endowment account, and we're still using that account today. The university originally did not provide us with any funding, but did provide meeting rooms for the group to get together. The early gatherings were just a way to gather and have interesting conversations. They had an occasional speaker, they did an occasional tour, and I thought it was most interesting that they made a big point is they always had sherry and hors d'oeuvres at their meetings, and but I don't know if they were as good as the brownies we get today. So I did a little more research and went and looked at the Bentley Library for some more information about our organization, and I found an article that said we actually started in 1944 with an organization called the Dunworkin Club. Which I thought might not be a bad name for us still today. That members included Presidents Harlan Hatcher and Alexander Ruthven, and we'll do a little more research on that. That's something that we just discovered as part of putting this together, and if that's really true, then next year we'll be celebrating our 80th anniversary. So, and I thought then I'm glad we're not going to age that quickly. So we could be doing this all over again next year. In 1996, we changed our name to the University of Michigan Retiree Association, and it became open to all faculty and staff members, and we became a 501c3 corporation. The membership grew to 1,000 by 1997. We expanded to 9 board members, later 12, and now we have 15 board members. With all the activities we have, we really need that many. Meetings were originally held in Wolverine Tower in Suite 18, which only held 50 people, so some of you wouldn't have been able to be here today if we stayed there. We moved on to the Best Western Hotel, which is the Wyndham Gardens that's across the street, and then we moved to Weber's in 2018. We expanded our programs and decided we needed a program committee, which was started in 2014, and attendance at our meetings grew to 100, which today I counted, we have over 110 people here today. Before COVID, we even had up to 150 people at times, so we have grown a lot. We used to have our meetings in auditorium style, and we discovered that having these round tables just generated much more discussion. So another advancement that we had. We were part of the schools that helped originated the Big Ten Retiree Association, which meets once a year and looks for ways from share our experiences with other schools. As often happens, Michigan ends up being the leader of the group, and as Catherine and I found out at this last one, they kept turning to us for answers to questions. So we are a leader in that. We have actually hosted 2 of the Big Ten conferences, and we will be hosting the conference again in 2025. We do get good support from the university with some funding, but we still, it's important for us to maintain our independence, and we've done that over the years. We have a direct liaison with the president through our HR director of benefits, and so we often communicate with the president of the university. We have done things over the years. We've developed a health day in 2005, as you just heard. The travel program began in 2015. In 2021, we started our shared interest groups that we talked about earlier. We survey our members once every 5 years to get your feedback on things that we should do differently, and the board takes those very seriously and tries to make changes with ideas that come up. Our meetings now are live streamed and recorded, so you can watch them at any time. The people online can watch us now, so we have close to 2,000 members, and a lot of people live outside the Ann Arbor area, so live streaming these and recording was really important so that we're helping all retirees, not just the ones that can gather here in person. We now have, as you well know, 2 speakers usually, the Learn and Grow session, and then a 2 p.m. seminar. We get great support from IT. When there was just a survey done of the Big Ten schools, and the support we get from IT is much greater than what a lot of other schools get. We even have swag, so I don't know if we have any here today for sale, but you can buy t-shirts and hats and that type of thing. So this is just a really brief history of our organization. We're going to do some more research now that the Bentley Library is open, and may have some additional things to add in the future. But I think you'll all agree that we've really come a long way since 1953, and we have a lot really to celebrate today. And then I did add one more note that wasn't mentioned earlier, is that we do have a table over here that we draw. We make cards for people with meals on wheels, so that when their meals are delivered, they can get a greeting card. And those are also used at some of the senior living centers in the area. So during our holiday break, if you have a chance, come over to the table here and make a card for some people to help them celebrate the holidays. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Al, very much. Carol, an honorarium actually went with that award, and I forgot to give it to you.
You're kidding.
You're very welcome.
Wow.
It was a lot of fun to put that together, quite honestly.
That was a great idea.
So we will transition now into our holiday gathering, our holiday social. You have materials on the table about all of the different holidays, and I would like to have the committee that worked on the holiday social please stand. You did a huge amount of work. Thank you very much. So this will actually conclude our online time. So for those of you watching at home, have a great season, great holiday, New Year's, and go blue. Thank you.